Imagine a car that liberated a nation after imprisoning it. A vehicle that was both the car of the people and a hugely valuable commodity. A car that has been dubbed the worst in the world, yet still remains fondly remembered by thousands. That car was the humble Trabant. Following World War II, Germany was split up between the West and the Soviet Union. This division was formalized in 1949 with the establishment of the German Democratic Republic, or GDR. Many people know this country as simply East Germany, a communist satellite state that was effectively controlled by the Soviet Union. Sure, they had their own parliament and head of state, but there still wasn't much democracy in the German Democratic Republic. The ruling Communist Party effectively had all the power and soon began to create an economic system modeled after the USSR. Regardless of your political beliefs, it is clear that a combination of corruption, authoritarianism, crippling Western sanctions, and the notorious Stasi secret police force ensured that most East Germans experienced a poor quality of life. Nevertheless, the country experienced what some consider to be an economic miracle, as it had many surviving industries and infrastructure from before the war. Additionally, the GDR was home to many highly skilled and technically minded citizens, allowing it to pull ahead of other Eastern Bloc states. For a while, there seemed to be hope within East Germany. This hope and brief period of economic progress resulted in the development of East Germany's very own people's car. Up to this point, most East Germans couldn't even dream of buying a new car, as most of the pre-war designs that were slowly being produced in the new nation, such as rebadged DKW F8 and F9 models, were far too expensive for the average family. Even if someone could afford one, production was severely limited due to Western embargoes placed on East Germany for steel and other important supplies. So, in early 1954, the government of the GDR ordered that a new people's car be built. It was to have 4 seats, weigh no more than 600 kilograms, consume no more than 5.5 liters per 100 kilometer, have an annual production run of 12,000 units, and cost only 4,000 GDR marks. In 1955, production of the IFA P70, also known as the Trabant P70, would begin. This vehicle served as the predecessor to the more well-known Trabant line, using newly developed body panels made from resin and cotton fibers, yes, recycled cotton was used to build cars, on the existing DKW F8 chassis. This material, known as Duraplast, became a defining characteristic of the Trabant, due to it being immune from corrosion. The P70 gained a lot of attention and was relatively popular. By 1959, somewhere around 38,000 P70s were produced. In 1957, the Trabant as we know it was introduced. By the way, Trabant is the German word for satellite, which is believed to be an allusion to the Soviet Sputnik satellite. It also means companion, which is definitely a bonus when creating a car for the people. Originally known as the P50, the little East German economy car was actually quite advanced for the time. The aforementioned Duraplast body, front-wheel drive, and 4-wheel independent suspension, courtesy of transverse leaf springs, were all impressive for the time, especially in East Germany. It could be had as a coupe, hilariously known as the limousine, and as an absolutely sick 2-door wagon. I mean, am I the only one who loves the way this little thing looks? I am? Okay then. However, perhaps most importantly, the Trabant was small, light, economical on fuel, and affordable for the average East German family. It became an immediate success, and soon the waiting list to buy one began to grow. However, despite the car's popularity, East Germany's lack of resources meant that the car had some limitations. While the body panels were corrosion resistant, they were mounted to a poor quality steel frame that quickly rusted. The car was powered by a leftover DKW designed air-cooled 499cc 2-cylinder 2-stroke engine with a truly whopping 18 horsepower. And being a 2-stroke, drivers had to fill up their car with a mixture of oil and gasoline. And since the vast majority of Trabants didn't have fuel gauges, that would have been far too capitalistic. Drivers had to open the hood and use the generously provided fuel dipstick to check how much fuel they had left. Additionally, the engine emitted copious amounts of noxious blue smoke, which couldn't have been good for East Berlin's air quality. The engine's design also meant that one could only coast in neutral or fourth gear, which was fitted with a freewheeling device that prevented the little 2-stroke from starving itself of oil. I mean, it's not like you would be coasting too often with less than 20 horsepower, so I guess it couldn't have been too much of a problem. Despite all of its downfalls, the Trabant represented the idea of freedom to East Germans. While rumors of the secret construction of a massive wall began to spread, a family could spontaneously explore Europe in their Trabant, temporarily leaving behind the repressive reality of their home nation. In essence, the Trabant unlocked a whole new world for many East Germans, and made the dream of car ownership, in a repressive country recovering from World War II, no less, much more feasible. While this may come as a surprise to some of you, the Trabant was actually updated fairly regularly in the early years of its production run, at least. In 1960, for example, the P50 received a fully synchronized gearbox and around 2 more horsepower. Then, in 1962, the Trabant P60 was launched, with a big block 600cc engine and a truly astonishing 23 horsepower. And in 1964, the significantly facelifted Trabant 601 was launched. It got a more modern, redesigned body, with most of the visible differences being the new grille and front fascia, and for a time it seemed like East Germany was making an effort to keep its people's car somewhat updated. However, this trend wouldn't last forever. You see, East Germany had a really big problem. Everyone was leaving East Germany. From 1949 to 1961, around 2.5 million East Germans fled to West Germany through West Berlin. Additionally, many of the people who fled for the West were highly educated individuals with advanced technical knowledge. This resulted in a major quote-unquote brain drain, which completely threatened East Germany's economy. In short, the East German government had to find a way to stop all the smart people from leaving their country. However, improving living conditions or adding benefits to staying in the East just wouldn't have gone along with the whole authoritarian police state thing. So, they naturally decided that the only logical solution was to start building a massive wall to keep people in. In secret, of course. By 1961, the massive Berlin Wall surrounded East Berlin. In its final form, the wall stood up to 13 feet tall and was constantly monitored by guards and watchtowers, who had orders to shoot anyone who tried to cross. Millions of East Germans were now imprisoned within the borders of their country and were isolated from the rest of the world. Following the release of the Trabant 601, updates became few and far between. In 1969, power was increased dramatically to 26 horsepower. In 1974, the engine received new connecting rod bearings. 1984, however, now that was a big year for the Trabant. The 1984 Trabant featured a new 2-stage carburetor, which slightly increased fuel economy, and perhaps most importantly, a 12-volt electrical system. Yes, all Trabants used 6-volt electrical systems until 1984. With this addition of the advanced, brand new electrical system, you can now specify your Trabant with optional features such as a rear window defroster and, get this guys, hazard lights. How luxurious. Additionally, throughout the years, you could get your Trabant 601 in a variety of different flavors. You had the 601 Standard for the peasants, and the 601S for Sonderwunsch, German for Special Edition, which had fog lights, reverse lights, and, most impressively, an odometer. And if you really wanted to live in the lap of luxury, you could get the 601 Deluxe, which featured chrome bumpers and two-tone paint. How fancy. There was also the 601 Kubel, which was a Jeep-style military version, and the 601 Tramp, yes, it's really called the Tramp, for civilians. These are basically like the Fiat 500 Jolly or Mini Moke, except for being a woefully outdated East German car. The 601 Heikomat featured a semi-automatic transmission designed for people with disabilities, and perhaps most surprisingly, there was the Trabant 800 RS, produced between 1986 and 1988, which was a freaking rally version that had a nearly 800cc engine and a 5-speed transmission. In all seriousness, I kind of just love the way these things look. I mean, just look at the livery. I mean, it was a woeful failure. I think their best finish was like 50th, because they decided they had the balls to race this thing in Group A, and like against like Audi Quattros and Lancia Delta. It didn't go well, but you know, they look good doing it. No matter which version of the Trabant you got, however, it was subject to a wide variety of different Trabant jokes. What do you call a Trabant at the top of a hill? A miracle. How do you double the value of a Trabant? Fill up the tank. An East German driver pulled into the service station and asked, "Can I get a windshield wiper for this Trabby?" After looking over the car, the attendant finally says, "Okay, it's a trade." Why does the Trabant have a rear window heater? To keep your hands warm while you're pushing it. Why was the Trabant made? There was a mistake. It was supposed to be a washing machine. I could go on forever, to be honest, but I should probably get back to the video now. Now, I will say that the pathetically outdated nature of the Trabant wasn't exactly the fault of the engineers working on the car. Over the years, many talented engineers made significantly more modern prototypes. In 1965, for example, engineers proposed the P602V, which was a hatchback version, which predated most Western hatchbacks, such as the VW Golf. But it was rejected by the East German government. In 1966, the P603 hatchback prototype, which actually looks quite modern for 1966, was created. It was rejected by the East German government. In 1970, engineers created the P760, which even included a 5-door version. It was rejected by the East German government. Beginning in 1971, engineers designed a plethora of P610 prototypes. They were all rejected by the East German government. In 1982, they created the P601 WE2 prototype, which, you guessed it, was rejected by the East German government. They also experimented with better engines, including a Wankel rotary. What if someone put a 13B into a Trabant? That would be kind of sick, right? Anyway, I should probably get back to the video. Of course, the East German government said that these improvements were unnecessary and would cost too much. And from the government's perspective, these changes really didn't make any sense. The car market had very few other options, creating constant demand for the Trabant no matter how infrequently it was updated. The restrictive economy was further crippled by Western sanctions, resulting in a severely limited annual production cycle. The result was a 15-plus year waiting list just to buy a Trabant. If the people were buying them anyway, why improve the car? To be fair, the East German car market did have a few more options than just the Trabant. If you had some more money, you could splurge on a Wartburg, which was a larger, more quote-unquote luxurious car. That was still loosely based on a pre-war DKW design, but anyway. It even had a 3-cylinder 2-stroke engine, rather than just a 2-cylinder. Now that is what I call luxury. Some families also owned other Eastern Bloc and Soviet vehicles, such as the Russian Lada and the Czech Skoda. However, these vehicles were more expensive than the humble Trabant, and there were basically no Western car options whatsoever due to sanctions and embargoes. For many families, the little Trabby was their only option. It provided people with a sense of freedom, even if they couldn't leave the borders of their country. It was terribly outdated by Western standards, but it would almost always get you to where you needed to go. And even if it didn't, it was an immensely simple machine that could be easily fixed. It became more than a car to many. It was part of the family. Because of the obscenely long waiting list to buy a Trabant, some interesting situations emerged. Families would add their newborn children to the waiting list in hopes of getting a car in time for them to learn how to drive. Used Trabants could sell for up to double what a new one cost, as they didn't have to wait. Trabants were a mainstay of the East German black market, which developed due to the country's severely restrictive economy. As such, the Trabant, a symbol of communism, became an exceedingly valuable commodity on the capitalist black market. The incredibly outdated Trabant was a symbol of greater issues within East Germany. It had a stagnant economy and prevented innovation. It was a police state which imprisoned its citizens within its borders and didn't allow for people to live elsewhere. Additionally, living conditions lagged behind the West. These trends, seen throughout the Soviet Union and other Eastern Bloc countries, combined with even greater pressure by the West, eventually resulted in Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev's economic liberalization policies. Additionally, in the late 1980s, several Eastern Bloc states began undergoing the process of democratization. It seemed like the Soviet Union was finally backing down from the control of their many puppet states, and anti-government protests sprung up in East Germany as a result. On November 9th, 1989, sections of the Berlin Wall were opened, and the East and West were subsequently reunified. Thousands of elated families packed their belongings into their Trabants and streamed into West Berlin with hopes of reuniting with long-lost relatives and living better lives. The route entering West Germany through Czechoslovakia became known as the Trail of Trabbies, as it was completely packed with the slow, crude, smoking, ancient cotton boxes on wheels. The outdated symbol of oppression had taken thousands and thousands of families to freedom. Surprisingly, the fall of the Berlin Wall did not immediately coincide with the end of the Trabant. In fact, the plucky little car got one of its most major updates in decades with the introduction of the Trabant 1.1. As a symbol of the cooperation between East and West Germany, the Trabant finally ditched its terrible two-stroke engine for a 1.1-liter four-stroke, four-cylinder engine from the Volkswagen Polo. The vehicle also received McPherson strut suspension, a floor-mounted shifter, and slight styling updates. It was predated by the Trabant 1.1e prototype, which features more significant styling changes that never actually made it to production. However, by the time the Trabant 1.1 entered mass production in May 1990, the world had moved on. The reunified country allowed former East Germans to buy a plethora of far more modern Western cars, and less than 40,000 Trabant 1.1s were made before it was discontinued in April 1991. Thus, after 34 years and over 3 million cars produced, the Trabant had met its end for good. The factory in Zwickau was bought and remodeled by Volkswagen and still exists to this day. Following the reunification of Germany, old Trabants became essentially worthless. Many were abandoned or turned into art pieces. Objectively, the Trabant was a terrible car that didn't really have a purpose, now that people could buy superior Western vehicles. However, many former East Germans still have fond memories of Trabants. To them, the Trabby represented the spirit of freedom in an oppressive country, and some missed their simplicity and character. Today, a loyal following of Trabant enthusiasts remain and work to keep their Cold War relics on the road. If one thing can be learned from researching the Trabant, it's that the vehicle has a rather complicated legacy. It's a piece of Cold War history, a vehicular representation of what lay behind the Iron Curtain. While some consider it to be the worst car in the world, others consider it to be an efficient use of East Germany's limited resources. While some consider it to be a symbol of authoritarian oppression, others consider it to be a symbol of freedom. While I'll leave you to decide what the little Trabby represents, I hope you come away from this video with a newfound understanding and appreciation for this tiny car that was made of cotton and was powered by a lawnmower engine. So, that's the end of the video. Thank you so very much for watching, especially if you've stuck around this far into the video. This is the first quote-unquote video essay I've done, and it's very different from the normal car gaming content that I've done for the past couple of years. So let me know if you like these types of videos. If you did, consider leaving a like or subscribing to the channel. It was most certainly very interesting to make this video, and I would recommend doing some further reading on the Trabant if you're interested in learning its full story, as I couldn't fit everything I found into this video. With that out of the way, goodbye, and have a great day.